There is one question I want to address now. Can I play with Windows 10 for free at home? Well, I have a pretty old laptop. It's Windows 7, Windows 8, whatever. I know a few years ago it was possible to upgrade for free, but I didn't. Now I am left with Windows 7. I want to get ready for the exam. I want to practice all these things. Can I somehow play with Windows 10? Yes, you can. Please note that when you go to Microsoft Evaluation Center, you will get an option to download Windows 10 trial version for 90 days and play with Windows 10 for 90 days for free. I recommend you download the ISO Enterprise file, click continue, and it is a single file that will be saved, and then we'll use a piece of software to install Windows 10 on your local PC. How can we do it? We are going to use something that is called VirtualBox. You can see the link on your screen. Please make sure that you download. I will not even show you how to install it. It's next finish and you're done. However, you have to make sure that your PC has a CPU that supports virtualization. You can see some information on your screen, but please make sure that you verify that your CPU supports virtualization. If you have a pretty old laptop, if your CPU doesn't support it, unfortunately you cannot install Windows 10 on top of your existing operating system. You can ask, okay, what is this VirtualBox? I've never seen it before. Well, the idea is that we want to virtualize our environment. We don't want to buy a dedicated laptop and install Windows 10 on it. No, I have an existing laptop, I have an existing desktop, and I want to install Windows 10 and play with it. I don't want to reinstall my applications. I don't want to have a dedicated laptop or desktop for it. I want to have my operating system over here, and VirtualBox is running, well, I have Windows 8 on this PC. I have VirtualBox, and now inside I can put as many operating systems as I want. Of course, you need a lot of RAM. Every time you create a new virtual machine, because this is the name for it, every time you create it, your virtual machine needs a lot of RAM. Of course, we'll talk about system requirements of Windows 10, but to be honest, you need at least 2 GB of RAM to play with Windows 10. So you can imagine that if your laptop has like 8 GB of RAM, when you boot up your Windows 7, 8 or even 10, you will be left with like 4 or 5 GB of RAM only. This means that you can install 2 Windows 10 virtual machines only. Of course, here we're absolutely fine. We'll need 1 machine, and this is absolutely fine. But if you want to create more virtual machines, you want to play with more sophisticated options, for instance, if you want to get to MTA server or networking, then you need more RAM. How to create a new virtual machine in VirtualBox? As you can see, I have a couple of virtual machines up and running, but that's okay. We'll create a new virtual machine. We say new, and now we have to give it a name. Let's call it Windows 10 MTA. Please note that if you type something that VirtualBox identifies, it will say, okay, so this is what I think, you're after Windows 10. Of course, if you provide a pretty strange name, VirtualBox will not figure it out. And it makes sense to go and choose an operating system that you want to install, because VirtualBox will suggest things that you have to configure. So over here, you want to install Windows 10 64-bit. Yes, there are 2 versions of our operating systems. We can have a 32-bit operating system and a 64-bit operating system. We'll talk about the main differences later on, but the main one is, the most important one is that a 64-bit operating system supports more RAM. When it comes to a 32-bit operating system, you can use up to 4 GB of RAM only. This is why we prefer 64-bit operating systems. Next, now we can see a question, okay, what about RAM? When we go to Microsoft.com, you will see that we need at least 1 GB of RAM for a 32-bit operating system and at least 2 GB of RAM for a 64-bit operating system. When it comes to hard disk space, we're okay with 20 GB because we are going to install a 64-bit operating system. Please make sure that you memorize these requirements for your exam. So, because we want to have a 64-bit operating system, we need at least 2 GB of RAM. Of course, as I mentioned in our previous lecture, it makes sense to give more. If Microsoft says, well, at least 2 GB of RAM, give it 4. If Microsoft says 1 GB of RAM, give it 2, and so on. This is exactly what I'm going to do. I will say here we go, 4 GB of RAM. We want to create a new virtual hard disk. Every time you create a new virtual machine, it is a file on your disk, and we want to create a new virtual hard disk now. I recommend you keep the first option. It's not that important at this stage. There are many options available over here, but that's okay. VDI is a file system, is a file name, that disk image that is used by VirtualBox, and we can leave it. Again, we leave it as the first option. We leave the first option because we want to have a hard disk that is pretty flexible. When we say I want to have 50 GB of space, I don't want to have a 50 GB file on my hard disk straight away, because of course when we install Windows 10, it will not need 50 GB straight away. Do you remember? We need at least 20 GB of disk space only, yeah? So Windows 10 of course will not install a lot of files here. And when we say we want to have a dynamic size option here, this means that VirtualBox will use, let's say, 10 GB now, and will allow Windows 10 to use more, but will not reserve 50 GB straight away. We say create, and that's it. Our virtual machine has been created. We can boot it up. We click here, start. And you can ask, okay, well, what about my operating system? Because you've not specified anything here. Have you ever installed an operating system on a laptop or a desktop PC? Well, in most cases, you need a CD or a USB disk. Yes, something that will be used by your device to install Windows 7, 8, 10, and so on. Over here, please note that I have not specified it yet, and I hope that you've downloaded the file from Microsoft.com. You have it in place, because we have to go to Devices, Optical Drives, choose Disk Image, and find the file that we've just downloaded. So over here, we open, and now we can say machine reset. And we're ready to install Windows 10 now. We'll continue in our next lecture.